Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we'll be discussing an article entitled, Is Masonry Out of Date?
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have three-quarters of our usual band of hosts. We have Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon, and myself and Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth, I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel, and we are Masons in the Grand Lodge of Washington here in Washington State. And we're sort of starting a bit of a series here where there are a treasure trove of Masonic articles out there. There's a cajillion of them, articles on Masonry. And we sort of each decided we're going to pick one and have a discussion about it. So I was the first sucker to raise my hand, so I had to pick first. And the article that I've chosen for us to discuss more as a starting point of a discussion about Masonry is entitled, Is Masonry Out of Date? It appeared first in the May 1968 edition of the Grand Lodge of Alberta newsletter. So if you can go to the Grand Lodge of Alberta website, it's in there under their newsletters. And also we're going to try and provide a link to the article in the show notes from another source so that you can look it up yourself and read the article. But it's interesting. It was written by Right Worshipful Brother F.G. Fox, who at the time was District Deputy in District Number 1 in Alberta. It was published, like I said, in the Grand Lodge Bulletin in May of '68. And it was also apparently reprinted in Caen, Mass., which was, I guess, in July of 2004, the 21st of July, 2004. So with that, the article is essentially questioning if Masonry is out of date, if our practices and our ritual, etc., are no longer relevant. So find the link, go read the article, because I think that'll help you understand our discussion, because we all, of course, have read it already. And then come back. We'll pause briefly. There you go. Now you've read the article. You can come back and you can listen to the discussion here. But I guess I sort of chose it. But did you guys have any sort of broad thoughts on what it was saying?
Go ahead, Stephen. I saw you take a deep breath.
Well, I don't know. It's been a question that's asked quite frequently, right? Because there are a lot of people who are of the mindset that our Constitution is undemocratic and our ritual is old-fashioned and sometimes difficult to understand. And it says, some even think that our teachings need to be modernized, right? And then it goes into analyzing this step by step and the different things about modernizing our ritual and our craft. And I don't know. I think when you change things and modernize things, you lose a lot of the historical reference. I think you lose a lot of the character, if you will, that makes it what it is.
The thing that immediately struck me was a very similar experience I had when I was district deputy myself, we had to deliver the Grand Master's message to the lodges, of course. And then we also were supposed to provide some wisdom, or at least I tried to provide some wisdom. It's very difficult for me to enhance the experience, or if I was visiting and they want you to talk about something, right? I can't talk about the Grand Master's message every single time I visit a lodge necessarily. And so there was a publication that I read, and I didn't think to look it up. I'm just thinking about it now, but I read the synopsis of this article. It was instructions for a lodge, instructions for a Mason, how to improve the Masonic experience. And I read it to him, and I said, "When do you think that was published?" I said, "It applies to us today, right? In the 2000s, in the 21st century, it applies to us today. Well, when do you think it was written?" And it was like in the 1940s or 1950s. And it was the same stuff, the same issues we were having now, we're having in the 20s and in the 50s and in the 30s. And when I saw this was initially published in 1968, I thought, is Masonry out of date today in 2021? Is it out of date in 1968, 53 years ago? Is it out of date in 1920? I mean, it's interesting how very similar things are a recurring theme in Masonry and in the world in general. But that's what really struck me initially, was that 53 years ago, they were talking about Masonry being out of date. And I was just at a installation yesterday, and the new master was talking about how their lodge itself and other lodges he's seen locally are having a resurgence of interest, especially after the pandemic, of course, but as things seemingly were calming down, but now there's this new variant. I mean, well, that's a whole nother show. But there's a resurgence of interest in Freemasonry. I would agree with that. There's lots of lodges, ours alone, and lots of lodges are experiencing an interest. And so I think that speaks to the message of the letter too. Is it out of date? No, I don't think Masonry is out of date. I think people are clamoring for more ideas or more concepts that this article talks about.
Well, and I think with the pandemic, it's had people doing a lot of, self-assessment, right? We've had all this time to be by ourselves and look at life and where we're at, and from the prospects of candidates waiting. I mean, we have I think half a dozen that have come since COVID, and they've all got a similar story, if you will, that they've, upon reflection of their life, right? So everybody has obviously made time to do some reflecting on where they were, right? And that they were looking for a connection, a brotherhood, or they were looking for the deeper meanings in life, and that one thing or another has connected Freemasonry to what they were looking for in their minds, right? But there's been a lot of soul searching and a lot of I guess self-assessment going on, which I think has created that.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually one of the reasons why I chose this article, is because it's, like you guys were just saying, there are timeless issues for Masonry and for a lot of things, frankly. Is it, is this really the same as it was, whatever, 50, 100 years ago? They're the same issues. As more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess is what I'm saying. That we're encountering these same issues.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the first part of the article, like Stephen was just saying, was it sort of talks about the topic in general, about how he hears it said that we're not keeping abreast of what's going on in the world, and that things should be modernized, or our teaching should be modernized, or our ritual, or our the constitutions should be modernized. And he sort of starts with the first sort of big topic is the constitutions of presumably the Grand Lodge of Alberta, but of Masonry in general. And by constitution, I sort of get the feeling that he doesn't mean constitution like that actual document of that Grand Lodge, so much as he means sort of the structure of Masonry. Like he's talking about the fact that we have a Grand Master, or that it's not, he asserts it's not as, or as he says, other people assert that it's not as democratic as it should be, or that we still use titles like Worshipful Master and that sort of stuff. And
I think he means, because they refer to Constitution as, that's their code. We call it the code here in Washington,
right? And
theirs is called the Constitution. I think I can get what you're talking about. That it's more of a landmark. We might call it more familiar. It's a landmark of it. But I think the Constitution, he's referring to the actual document itself. It's not capitalized, which is interesting though. The C isn't capitalized anywhere. I think you think it would be, and that is one in that next paragraph there. Like you're referring to, it does talk about. A lot of times we think the Grand Master has ultimate power. He can just do whatever he wants to. He wields a scepter, and it's just a gavel. It's not a scepter. He's not going to part the waters or call anyway. But it's surprising how, yes, we submit to the charges and resolutions and stuff, and the authority of the Grand Master, essentially. But really, if you look at the code or constitution, he really has pretty limited power. He can't just arbitrarily go in and take a. I guess he could do it. What I highlighted was that the Board of General Purposes. I still love that idea. If you look at all the anywhere in my, but this is referring to the Board of General Purposes on a Grand Lodge level, as I understand it, which we would call probably our jurisprudence committee. We have a jurisprudence committee, so it's probably kind of like that. But I even highlighted the idea that it's composed of members elected by the craft, and the jurisprudence is not.
Yeah.
That would be a great thing, I think, to have jurisprudence be elected.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're talking about, getting rid of, we could do away with titles and replace them with things like president and first and second vice president and so on. But, it takes it away from the uniqueness of our fraternity to begin with. If we were to standardize it like every other organization and have the same names and titles for their structures, we may as well just be another social club then, right? Our ritual has always been one of those definite things that sets us apart from any other organization.
And there's, so I know I listened to the Brought to Light podcast. I think they've stopped broadcasting, but it's a pretty cool podcast out of Victoria in Australia. And they have, I'm sure I'll get this wrong, so I apologize to the Australian Masons out there, but they have an elected like board of directors sort of that's oversees a lot of their business and that sort of thing. I think. But yeah, I guess in my admittedly limited Masonic experience, I haven't heard a lot of people say, I've heard people say worshipful, what's up with that kind of thing. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone say we should wholesale clear out and change what everyone's addressed as. And I kind of feel like, at least here in Washington, I'm from what I've heard you say, Steve, I think it's similar in BC, that there's not a, if we wanted to change the Washington Masonic Code, we could. It happens all the time. There's a good half dozen resolutions passed at every Grand Lodge every year. There's not I don't feel like we're that undemocratic, kind of like you guys were just saying, that we're not that undemocratic an institution, and we're not. If we felt we were, we could change that. If there is a mechanism for that, and I guess while I agree that I would
flawed, the mechanism, albeit flawed.
No mechanism made by humans is unflawed. So.
What I'm referring to is going to become a resolution at the next annual communication is that in our particular code, it takes correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, it takes a 90% pass to change something in the code. Standard work, something in the standard work. And if it doesn't pass, it's held over, as we call it. So then the second year, it comes up for consideration again, and I think it's a 75% pass rate.
2/3 maybe?
Maybe 2/3. I don't think it's that little. I think it's 75%. Or 3/4. Maybe it's a 3/4 vote. Well, 75%. It's still pretty significant, but it's not 90%. And so the discussion or the argument is that why is there a lesser amount just because it's the second year?
Why is it being continued for a second year if it didn't get past the first year?
Well, again, they're hoping that there'll be either a further consideration, or maybe a different group of men might be there, or whatever. Yeah, it's kind of the part of the discussion too. Is that if you can't pass it with 90, why are we lowering? Are we lowering the bar to 75% to 3/4, or should we maintain it at 90%? And that's kind of the basic argument. Interesting.
That's not what we're here to argue today, but I actually kind of like it. There you go.
You like the two-step?
I do. I feel like 90% one time, fine. But if you can get a 2/3 majority of people to agree twice on something a year apart, I think that's a valid threshold. But anyway, not off topic.
Okay.
Back to the article at hand.
So back to the article at hand.
I will pull the article chooser's prerogative and say, oh no, we're not talking about that now.
So if we go along with the article, and where they keep talking about, considering the different changes, and then it says, now consider modernizing our teachings. Let us enumerate what they are. We teach brotherly love, relief, truth, temperance, fortitude, prudence, justice, faith, hope, and charity, right? As the more prominently known list. But how can you, when you're teaching those things as a subject, or how do you really modernize any of that? That is what it is. I don't understand how one would even think to change what we have with respect to it, because our lectures and our as they say, everything we do is illustrated by symbols and veiled in allegory, right? Well, or vice versa. But it's like you can't change it, or essentially you're just rewriting everything to be a more of a layman's term, I guess, right? Where it doesn't make you think and have thought-provoking statements.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I feel like a lot of conversations about this sort of topic quickly go into the slippery slope fallacy. There's one of those logical fallacies that, well, if we start changing the words, then, we might as well just chuck fortitude. Who cares about that kind of thing? And I think, so this is probably not a valid comparison, but here I go anyway. So a few years ago came out this version of the Bible called The Message. And some guy whose name I should know, but don't, went back essentially to the text and translated it into modern English. So it's not, King James version high at the time, whatever that was many years ago English, it's current English. So the stories are, but he didn't say, he didn't pitch the I don't know, whatever, the parable of the oh man, my Bible knowledge is escaping me. The son who goes away and comes back, and they kill the fat cat. The
prodigal son.
Prodigal son. Thank you. Oh Lord.
I went through what parable you were grasping at.
I went to church this morning, honest. But so he didn't chuck the parable of the prodigal son. He didn't change the meaning of it, but he changed the words that are used in the book to convey that meaning. And I honestly believe, while I love our ritual, I don't have a problem with the idea of changing some of the language to make it more current in again, teaching the same lessons. And I'm getting a lot of grumpy stares from the other two people of this. And actually, this is actually something I was thinking about was in Canada, you guys have what, 3 rituals in BC?
4
rituals in BC. And I bet they all more or less teach the same lessons, right? Did any of them get rid of temperance and fortitude and justice and prudence?
No, but it's how they're taught. It's how their lectures are, and how the verbiage is that is it's still different, right? And so, as the guys in that do that funny Canadian work or emulation work, right? They say, in our ancient work, our proficiencies after each degree are very lengthy, and they've simplified it and shortened the verbiage to make it more modern, right? And easier for a guy to proceed to the next step, right? They say that, 6 pages of memory work to prove yourself and go to the next step is just way too much, right? We shouldn't put that kind of expectation of work onto our entered apprentice and fellow craft. And we that do the ancient work would argue that to shorten it is to not fully teach it, right? Because every time you cut something out, you either leave more room for interpretation or more room for question in someone's mind, right? So I think the better job you do of teaching it, it's important, right?
I think that comes to the heart of even what this show was originally meant to be about, right? If we had the New American Standard standard work that was plain language and it was described everything and provided the most current and clear information, a guy wouldn't feel the need to go and learn more about it because he's already been taught it. So I think it in some regard forces us to have, which by the way, we're going to have this in our new, we're still trying to find a name for it. It's probably going to be some kind of candidate education, not new candidate education, but some kind of a candidate or new Mason education program that we're updating. In the back, we have had in the past up to 60 or 70 questions, which I think is a little bit of overload. A lot of people agree with that. So probably like 20 questions, and then the other 40 or 60 questions will be entitled for discussion. So I think that's really what I think that enhances the experience. Even the guys in the 50s, or even when Preston put the work together, I think that it still was meant to be a little archaic or a little bit old, so that it would cause a man to go and try to learn what it's about and try and understand. Because I may, just like we're doing tonight, I read it one way, you read it a different way, Matt reads it another way, and we all have our opinions about what it might say or what it means to us. And I think we're getting right to the core of what Freemasonry is kind of about. It means a little bit different to each person. Ultimately, yes, we have some standards, we have standard work, we have some rituals, we have some things that we do that are normal and common, and grips and signs and words and those sign of secret, other things. But then there's this other stuff, the allegory, and the meaning, the actual meaning to it. I might interpret it differently, and it applies to me. And it may apply to me differently today than it does tomorrow or 10 years from now. I mean, I'm still listening to lectures, listening to things going, oh, I never thought of it that way. And I just, either I wasn't listening before, or I've had a new experience and now it relates to me differently. It's really fun for me anyway to do that. And then also when you're memorizing parts, you take time to think about it. And what does that word mean? And how, like just tonight, I had an idea of what this is a bad word to choose. The word hoary. I had an idea what it meant, but initially in my mind, that's not what I thought it meant. And so I went to the dictionary and looked it up, and I went, oh, that's what that means.
We are getting to be hoary with age, I think. Yes.
And so it just, again, I can read something and have the general idea and general context of what it means, but when you take time to study it, you'll learn more about it. And I think that's part of what our ritual, a guy that's coming into Masonry or developing himself as a Mason, he might not understand it. And so it gives an opportunity for someone that's like Matt or Stephen, that's more educated. Trevor, we've had on the panel, any of the panelists we've had, has more knowledge they can share, give an opportunity to share. It does many things. One, it gives the guy something new to think about. It builds that relationship with that Mason, that mentor or person he's talking to. It then gives him something to go and evangelize about. I mean, whenever I get a chance, I get a little nugget of knowledge. I go and evangelize it and talk to people, and then it further expands my opportunity to open the discussion and to have a casual conversation about Freemasonry. Right?
Oh, we know about your evangelizing. We've noticed. But so I guess my question is, and we're sort of running low on time, but I'll say it anyway, because then I can say we're done, and then no one can refute what I say. But were you intrigued by the lessons of Masonry because of the oldie-timey language that was used, or were you intrigued by the lessons of Masonry because of the content of those lessons? Because I'm not saying we should ditch the square as a symbol, but I'm saying square is not a good example, but choose your favorite difficult to understand passage about Masonry. Could it not be just
that question, Matt? Like, just so simple. but it's so long that we should take it into part 2.
Excellent. So I win. Good. Glad to hear it. my effort to shutter the conversation with my question has succeeded. But anyway, so we'll leave it at that and we'll come back. But yeah, what I encourage our listeners to think for the next week until the next episode comes out are the lessons of Masonry and the language of Masonry so intertwined that they cannot be separated? Or could you learn the lessons of Masonry just as validly through an updated ritual, through an updated text? Maybe that's the right way to phrase it. Vocabulary, etc. So, and for that matter, we'll be posting this on our social media accounts and such. So please, on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, leave your comments. Let us know what you think about it, because well, obviously we are the authorities on such things, but we are happy to listen to other people's opinions. And it's an interesting conversation. And obviously the three of us disagree, and I think there are other people with other opinions that are just as probably more valid than mine out there. So please leave some comments and let us know what you think. And we look forward to reading them and interacting with you on that. So, and then, like I said, next week we'll be back with the correct opinion. So on that note, thank you all for listening to the Working Tools. Excuse me. We're listening to the Working Tools podcast, and we look forward to talking to you again next week. Goodbye.